Dinosaurs as pets. The very idea makes my biscuit crumble and steam fly out of my teacup. But bear with me, dear listener, as tonight is not about the mighty Tyrannosaurus or the stomping brutes that would flatten your herbaceous borders with a sneeze. Tonight is about the ones you could possibly have kept in the sitting room. The clever ones. The ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time. The ones who might have perched on your windowsill, rearranged your sock drawer, or chirped at the kettle when it reached the boil. Not all dinosaurs were giant, roaring engines of extinction. Some were pocket-sized mischief makers, and if the asteroid had politely missed, well, we might have found ourselves arguing about whether to leash our sister Sisticosaurus at the park. This is no idle ramble. I've prepared a list. 5 extinct creatures, I believe, given patience, a warm hearth, and maybe a reinforced cutlery drawer, could have been your new best friend. But, and here's the delicious part, at the end, Pig the cat and I will reveal what modern animal each dinosaur most closely resembles. Now, while I was pondering pet raptors and prehistoric house manners, Pig had descended silently to the floor. With the slow, deliberate movements of someone committing a very polite crime, she nudged open the drawer where I keep my rarest teaspoons, and then vanished with something glinting between her teeth. The mystery deepens. But we'll get to her later. For now, our journey begins with a dinosaur so dramatic, so unapologetically flamboyant, that it could have had its own Instagram account. Ladies, gentlemen, and others of excellent taste, it's time to meet the Microraptor. The first time I imagined keeping a Microraptor as a pet, I was sitting on the garden bench with a lukewarm cup of Earl Grey. The sky was that particularly indecisive shade of grey that suggests either drizzle or divine intervention. I'd just finished rereading a volume of speculative paleobiology when something black and glossy swooped down from the oak tree and nearly absconded with my biscuit. Turned out it was a magpie. But for a glorious moment I believed hard. Microraptor. A dinosaur the size of a crow with 4 wings. Yes, 4. And an attitude problem. Covered in glossy, iridescent feathers that shimmered like a petrol slick in candlelight, it lived some 120 million years ago, mostly in trees, presumably judging everyone below. Microraptor didn't fly so much as glide, using its 2 legs and 2 arms, each feathered like a Victorian sleeve, to drift from tree to tree in pursuit of prey, or snacks, or drama. It would have made the most absurd companion, I muttered to Pig just this morning, while rummaging behind the radiator for my 3rd favourite spoon. It would never have obeyed commands, of course. Too independent, too stylish. But I suspect it would have made a lovely pest. Pig, who was now busily transferring crumpled napkins and something squeaking into a cardboard box labelled "Knitting, Do Not Touch," offered no response. Microraptor wasn't content with existing. It was, to put it plainly, a performer. Recent studies suggest it may have hunted in twilight hours, its plumage catching even the faintest rays of low light, shimmering like a disco ball from the Cretaceous. Can you imagine it in your kitchen? Leaping from cupboard to cupboard, knocking over spice jars, rearranging tea tins by colour and emotional tone. Not just a pet, a house spirit, an opinionated roommate with a penchant for bugs. It would have been trainable, perhaps, in the way that clever birds are trainable. Offer it a shiny button, and it might fetch your pen. Offer it your undivided attention, and it would ignore you entirely. An absolute nightmare at bedtime. And yet, I think I'd have loved it. You don't ask a creature like that to behave, you merely adapt. You learn to cover your butter, to sleep with earplugs, to expect the unexpected when you open the tea cupboard. And lest you think I've gone entirely mad with nostalgia for a species I've never met, well, I'd remind you that some creatures defy extinction by sheer will. And so we close this chapter on our feathered drama queen with one last thought. If ever a creature embodied the phrase "makes an entrance," it was Microraptor. Mysterious, glossy, disruptive. The kind of pet who would learn how to unlock the biscuit tin and who'd leave you a beetle in return. It began as many great things do with sound. Not thunder this time, nor the clatter of spoons flung from the tea tray, but a quiet, deliberate rustling from behind the azalea hedge. A rustle followed by a squeak, followed by Pig emerging with twigs in her fur, looking uncharacteristically sentimental. I stepped out onto the garden path, mug in hand, heart inexplicably warmed. Perhaps it was the light, or the springy earth beneath my slippers, or perhaps it was simply this, the deep, undeniable sense that some creatures, fuzzy or feathered or scaled, are made not to astound us but to belong to us. That, dear listener, is where the Psittacosaurus comes in. Insert image. Roughly the size of a medium dog, this delightful herbivore was built for companionship. It had a beak like a parrot, cheek horns like a teenage punk rocker, and possibly porcupine-like bristles along its tail, presumably to help it look more intimidating when startled by, say, a particularly menacing toad. Psittacosaurus didn't hunt, it didn't roar, it didn't challenge predators unless pressed, it simply was. It existed in herds, wandering across ancient landscapes nibbling ferns and, one imagines, occasionally chasing butterflies with a look of determined optimism. "I dare say," I muttered aloud, stirring a spoonful of plum jam into my morning tea. "You'd make a cracking companion, wouldn't you? Short-legged, chatty, able to detect whether I've had one biscuit too many." Pig, now reclined on the windowsill, turned her head slightly. Her cardboard box fortress, now alarmingly lined with feathers, and the rubber stopper from my hot water bottle, pulsed with a faint glow. We do not speak of it. Back to our cheerful friend. Psittacosaurus had the sort of face that made you want to knit it things, possibly a jumper or a festive hat. The kind of companion who wouldn't fetch your newspaper, but would certainly accompany you as you went to retrieve it, tail quills twitching, beak snapping rhythmically, somehow humming to itself. Now here's the truly delightful part. Psittacosaurus fossils have been found in abundance. So abundant, in fact, that some paleontologists have suggested they were as common as squirrels. Imagine that. Little beaked fellows trotting about, nibbling on your flower beds, squabbling over fallen fruit. You kept me like a secret, but I kept you like an oath. Taylor Swift's voice drifted in from the parlour gramophone just as I thought it. A line perfectly suited to the kind of love one might reserve for an ancient companion, forgotten by time but still quietly sacred. You'd walk it, of course, on a harness, down the lane, past the postbox and the allotments where it might attempt to munch on someone's rhubarb. You'd apologise profusely but secretly beam with pride, and at home it would curl at your feet. No drama, no feathers in the soup, just quiet presence. A mug-sized dinosaur with the temperament of a loyal gardener's assistant. The next creature on our list is built for cold nights, warm laps, and glowing eyes that see in the dark. Bring a blanket, and perhaps a spare tea towel. We're going somewhere chilly. To tonight's guest of honour, Liaelinasaura, a dinosaur built for precisely this sort of evening. This little marvel lived in what is now Australia, back when Australia had less surfing and more snowdrifts. Roughly the size of a fox and likely covered in fine, insulating feathers, it thrived in dark, freezing conditions where the sun might vanish for weeks at a time. Liaelinasaura didn't complain, didn't migrate. It simply curled up in its burrow and endured, a stoic, star-eyed survivor, and, if I may be bold, a potential bedwarmer of prehistoric pedigree. Its most astonishing feature? The eyes. Positively enormous. Great dark marbles set into its head like two moons caught in orbit. Perfect for spotting movement in low light, or judging you silently for trying to dunk your biscuit twice. I imagined one now, nestled at my feet, half buried in blankets, occasionally rustling the pages of my book as it adjusted its tail. The gramophone, as usual, offered commentary from the parlour. Taylor again, a line about feeling overlooked. And in that moment I saw it. Liaelinasaura, the perennial understudy of the dinosaur world. Not ferocious, not gigantic, just steady, glowing, there when you needed warmth and quiet. I'm convinced that Dinosaurs would have made the perfect companion for insomniacs. Gentle, luminous, night-adapted, the sort of creature who wouldn't just tolerate your 3 a.m. pacing, but would quietly join you, perhaps nudging the kettle on with its snout. It is no surprise, then, that I've begun seeing signs of similar behaviour in Pig. Last night, around 2:17 a.m, I awoke to find her perched atop the radiator. She wasn't asleep. She was watching the cardboard box. The box itself was glowing faintly blue. "Pig," I whispered, "what are you raising in there?" She didn't look away, and then a chirp. A small, brittle chirp like a porcelain teacup tapping itself. I have not slept since. But back to Dinosaurs, it was not flashy. It did not demand your attention. It simply existed, glowing softly in the background of time. And when you were cold, when the world outside turned grey and mean, it was there, with luminous eyes and patience, and a tail long enough to warm both your feet at once. Protoceratops, the grumpy garden guardian. I had just stepped outside to water the rhubarb, my slippers squelching in the grass, kettle in one hand, and a suspiciously warm biscuit in the other, when I saw it. The garden gnome was face down. Again! Now, I'm not saying Pig is responsible. I'm just saying she was sitting very nearby, licking one paw in the unmistakable manner of someone who has just toppled an entire civilization and now fancies a nap. And I thought to myself, if only I had a protoceratops. Yes, dear listener, this next candidate for prehistoric petum is not a glamour creature. It doesn't glide, it doesn't shimmer, it does not chirp like a xylophone, but it is dependable, solid, a creature of mud and mulch and sideways glances, roughly the size of a large dog but built like a stubborn wheelbarrow. Protoceratops. A desert dweller originally, but in temperament, pure allotment guardian, squat, scaly, and deeply unimpressed by novelty. You wouldn't need to leash it. It wouldn't wander. It would patrol your borders, grunt at foxes, and lie down on molehills in a sort of passive-aggressive truce with the landscape. And oh, that frill! It wasn't for ramming things, not like its later cousins, the Triceratops. No, this was more of a display, a decorative protest shield, a portable bit of architecture that said, "I'm not angry, just disappointed." I watched Pig from the steps as I poured water into the rhubarb planter. The cardboard box behind her now hummed and ticked, and was decorated with what I can only describe as a spork halo and a very small scarf. She glanced at me, slowly, as though she knew what I was thinking. Protoceratops, I said aloud, wouldn't have stood for any of this. Pig blinked. I'm fairly sure it was in Morse code, and still the image remains in my mind. Me, in my cardigan and wool socks, sipping from a chipped mug, with a protoceratops seated nearby like a boulder that growls when bothered. The kind of creature that never runs, only rolls its shoulders and dares you to make a fuss. Would it have been affectionate? Maybe, in its way. It might have leaned into your side like a warm sack of bricks, or shuffled behind you from garden bed to shed, grunting whenever you dug poorly. A kind of prehistoric head gardener, and the best part? Protoceratops fossils have been found in family groups, evidence that they may have lived together in little grumpy herds, all of them collectively sighing at whatever nonsense the Cretaceous world threw their way. Back in the cottage, the subplot continues. Pig has now affixed 4 polished buttons to the side of the box. They resemble eyes. The humming has developed a rhythm, like breathing. And this morning I caught her carrying in an egg cup filled with birdseed, not for her. No, no. She placed it gently inside the box. I am, for the record, alarmed. Yet I can't help but feel that Protoceratops would approve. A box, a mystery, a vaguely threatening hum. These are the sorts of things one guards in silence. So yes, I'd trust a Protoceratops with the garden, and the porch, and possibly the library. It wouldn't rearrange your books. It wouldn't knock over your mug. It wouldn't even notice the gramophone. But it would sit and stare and protect you from invisible threats, like gnomes and wind and feelings. And no, I shan't tell you what modern creature matches this ancient curmudgeon. Not yet. That joy's reserved for the final cup. The infamous, the misunderstood, the fantastically feathered oviraptor. For nearly a century, oviraptor was unfairly slandered. Its name means egg thief, a label pinned to it by early paleontologists who found one fossilised near a nest and assumed the worst. But in time, science caught up. That fossilised oviraptor, it wasn't stealing the eggs, it was brooding them, guarding them with a posture familiar to anyone who's tried to protect a biscuit tin from a visiting relative. And suddenly the narrative shifted. The thief became the parent. The villain, a misunderstood caregiver with claws and a penchant for nesting. You can see the appeal, can't you? A small beaked dinosaur, roughly turkey-sized, with strong arms, a feathered tail and enormous eyes that could pierce guilt out of the most well-trained puppy. It likely had a strong social bond with its mates. It probably vocalised. It may have even purred. "I knew you'd be trouble," I murmured to the gramophone, which obligingly played something minor key and mysterious. "If you kept an oviraptor as a pet, you'd quickly learn to lock your pantry. It wouldn't eat everything, just the interesting things. The glittery biscuits, the pickled radishes, the experimental cheese you weren't really ready to commit to. It would redecorate, move things, collect them, arrange your socks by emotional tone and tax code, and it would never, ever steal your affection. It wouldn't need to. You'd give it willingly, like the final biscuit in the tin. Now you might ask, how would such a creature fare in a modern cottage? Rather well, I'd wager. With a nesting box, some floor space, and a steady supply of oddly textured treats, oviraptor would thrive. It would follow you from room to room, rearranging the coasters, clicking its beak at the kettle, a busybody, a house spirit, a cheeky little curator of chaos. And speaking of chaos, let us return to Pig. This afternoon the box opened, not with a bang or a hiss or even a dramatic shimmer, just a gentle pop, like a biscuit tin lid under tension, and out waddled something small, round, feathered. It peeped. Pig did not panic. She merely turned, nudged it gently with her nose, and settled beside it as if she'd been expecting the creature all along. I, however, am shooketh. I suspect this was always the plan. I suspect she has outmanoeuvred me. And so, as the wind picks up and the tea steeps stronger, we close our list with a reminder. Not all companions are obvious. Some are chaotic. Some are misunderstood. Some steal eggs and then raise them like their own. Oviraptor was never a thief. It was a caretaker, a fiddler of furniture, a defender of the odd and the shiny, which frankly makes it perfect for this household. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must build a second cardboard box. Apparently we are now a family. It was just after tea. The light had gone all golden at the edges, that lovely late afternoon honey glow that makes one wistful for no reason in particular. Pig was asleep, of course, curled into a question mark beside the fireplace. Her newest feathered offspring nestled beneath one paw. I stood in the doorway, warm mug in hand, staring out across the garden where the gnomes now lived in what I believe is active fear. A single thought curled in my mind like steam. They're going to want to know. You, dear listener, you've waited patiently. You've endured the biscuit metaphors, the dinosaur names that sound like spells, the suspicious behaviour of a certain orange and white cat, who may or may not be hatching interdimensional birds. The modern pet equivalents to your favourite prehistoric companions. Drum roll, if you please, or failing that, a polite stirring of a spoon in a saucer. 1. Microraptor, the glimmering glider. This four-winged beauty would not be out of place perched on your shoulder. Yes, the tiny acrobat of the marsupial world, lovably hyper, prone to gliding between lampshades, often wears an expression of mild surprise. Just like Microraptor, they're happiest with friends, and possibly a little fleece pouch to sleep in. With its stubby limbs, chipper energy, and those natty bristles down its tail, this little veggie muncher would follow you everywhere, and probably bark at the vacuum. Modern pet equivalent, the bearded dragon. friendly, quirky, often enjoys basking, will tolerate being dressed in miniature cardigans for seasonal photo shoots. Leah Nasora, the cozy cave cuddler, bright-eyed, big-tailed, as charming as a campfire under the aurora. Modern pet equivalent, the fancy rat, clever, social, fond of pockets and people. If Leah Sora ever kept a diary, it would be colour-coded and emotionally insightful. Protoceratops, the grumpy garden guardian, a dignified creature, one that can stare at weeds until they retreat underground. Modern pet equivalent, the tortoise, slow-moving, ancient, judgmental in the best way. Will outlive your patio furniture and still think your compost bin is untidy. Oviraptor, the tea thief's cousin, chaos embodied, a feathered whirlwind with a heart of gold. Modern pet equivalent, the African grey parrot, intelligent, curious, possibly psychic, will mimic your voice, unlock your biscuit tin, and ask questions you're not ready to answer. So there you have it, our prehistoric pantheon, lovingly reimagined for the modern hearth. They may not have claws or crests, but their spirits persist, in our laps, on our mantles, and sometimes hiding our spectacles. Pig, of course, was right all along. The creature from the box is asleep again, its head tucked under a wing. Pig has begun lining a second box with lavender and newspaper. I dare not interfere. But I did place a teacup beside the nest, just in case. Because if there's one thing we've learned from these marvellous, mad, extinct creatures, it's this. Even the strangest companions with the oddest habits can find a home here. In the quiet between thunder, in the warmth between sips, in a cottage with crooked shelves, a talking kettle, and a cat who may or may not be rewriting natural history. Thank you for joining us on this peculiar journey. Now go, put the kettle on, and consider what strange and ancient friend might already be curled beside your feet. May your teacup never be empty.
Your cup, let the science flow. Tea and gravity's the place to go, where tea and physics steep them deep. With tea and gravity, knowledge will keep.